if you can't hope for a better day, hope for another day, and the world will do the rest.
From the Mamma Mia podcast network, I'm Mia Friedman, and this is No Filter. Real stories that'll make you lean in. Amy Molloy has lived a big life. She's had anorexia, she was widowed at 23, divorced in her late 20s, lost her job as a fancy magazine editor, forged a new career, married for the third time, and had 2 babies. And she's only 33. She's written a book called The World Is a Nice Place that's all about the optimism that's really pulled her through some pretty crushing times. And in between breastfeeds, she popped on a train from Kiama to sit down with me to talk about her very fascinating life and how she's navigated it. Here's Amy Molloy. I want to start by asking you about your first wedding day.
Do you know what I realised on the train on the way here? It's 11 years today since I was widowed.
Oh.
And this says a lot that I didn't know. And even when we booked the date for this podcast, and I obviously put it in my calendar, and I didn't click until I was on the train on the way here, and I thought, wow, that's big. And big that I didn't realise, and wonderful that I didn't realise.
I was going to ask how you felt, because did you feel guilty a little bit?
No, but I would have done in the past.
Yeah.
And I did take a little quiet moment on the train, and I held my thermos of tea up to the air and gave a little silent cheers to my first husband and had a very small moment. But I didn't feel guilty, and I definitely would have done. But I do write in the book about how, in terms of dates and anniversaries, I always say to myself, is there a reason I should feel sadder today than I did yesterday? Or is there a reason I should feel sadder today than I will tomorrow? Has anything changed in the last 24 hours apart from a date on a calendar? And no, it hasn't. And so it was nice to acknowledge it, and it's fitting that I'm sitting here talking about it, but I don't think it's amplified my sadness or my guilt or my love just because it happens to be the 2nd of July today.
So 11 years and 3 weeks ago, you were getting ready to get married.
Yes.
Tell me about that day.
Oh, gosh, I have to be really careful about how I talk about it and working out what's a true memory and what isn't. Because I think we all, with something like that we've talked about a lot and thought about a lot, we have to be really careful about what's kind of a fabricated memory and an exaggerated memory and how you truly felt in that moment. The night before the wedding, I was a wreck. I wanted to call it off. I was saying, what are we doing? How can we survive this day? And how can we survive what comes afterwards? So that was the real emotional time for me. I think the morning of the wedding, I was just a bride getting ready for her wedding day.
You were 23.
I was 23.
How old was your husband?
He was slightly older. He was 36. And all my family had come over from England. We got married in Ireland. And I had my sisters there, my cousins there, who were my bridesmaids. And I was just, I had this beautiful dress and I was just getting married. But there was this kind of secret layer underneath it that I had given my husband's groomsman a checklist that he had to go through as he helped my husband get ready. And things like, make sure he takes his morphine, make sure he takes his steroids, asks if he needs a wheelchair, check, is he looking dizzy, is his vision blurring, like all the signs that would point to his brain tumour swelling. And, his poor groomsman on the morning of the wedding, whilst most people were just, having a drink and doing those usual duties, he had to go through this checklist to check that the man who was getting married wasn't dying on that day, because it was very likely that he could have died on that day.
So you knew he was going to die, and you knew that it was imminent?
We had been given a prognosis for 3 months, and he died pretty much almost to the day of 3 months after we were given that prognosis. And at the time we were engaged, and, I was 23, so we were planning a long engagement and get married somewhere off in the future. But after we found out he had that few weeks to live, he said, can we get married before I die? So...
Did you agree straight away?
Yeah. Oh, you don't say no.
No, I guess that would be an awkward one to turn down.
You don't say no. I don't actually even remember kind of having the conversation or thinking about it. It just became something we were clearly going to do. And we both hoped that it would be a forever wedding and forever marriage. But obviously it didn't turn out to be that way. So
3 weeks later he died.
Yes.
That must have been an enormous, I was going to say gift, to be with him at that time, or to have that 3 weeks with him. What was it like?
It was a strange kind of waiting period that we kind of moved between being really hopeful that it was all going to be okay.
Were there times of that?
And there were absolutely times and I think you need that to be able to keep going. And then there were other times of total doubt and desolation. Like I remember, hiding in my garden, phoning my mum and just saying, I just wish it would be today. Because I just that waiting. I think there's a few things worse than that, just wondering when it's going to be every night. And wondering what it's going to look like. Because, he could have gone on for years, really, and deteriorated very slowly. And he was a very vibrant, active man, and it wouldn't have suited him at all. And in the end, he ended up having a stroke whilst we were sleeping one night. So I woke up the next day and just realised he couldn't talk or really walk or really didn't know who I was. And had one of those surreal moments of, in hindsight, I managed to kind of carry him to the car. And now I look back, I think, when people lift lorries off their kids and things and in accidents, managed to somehow get him to the car. Didn't think of calling an ambulance, obviously it didn't go through my head at the time. And drove an hour to the hospital with one of my hands on the steering wheel and one holding him upright in the passenger seat, because every time I let go, he'd fall to one side on top of me. And he kind of was saying various things, like I would say his name over and over again, or his nickname, and he would repeat it back to me. And I drove for an hour, a good hour like that, holding him up until we reached the hospital. And now I look back and I think I was a 23-year-old. That poor little girl that I was then. I just have absolute deep sympathy and admiration for her. And I do see her almost as a separate someone to me. Like I talk about her in third person for a reason, because I can't quite comprehend that was me.
There aren't a lot of blueprints for how to be a 23-year-old widow, are there?
Oh, no. No one tells you. No one knows, I don't think. And no one wants to think about it. No one wants to write that book because no one wants to believe it actually happens. But of course it does, more than we ever think. So I had to find my own way, which was both, I made many, many mistakes and did many hilarious things and many heartbreaking things and hurt probably a lot of people along the way in my quest to kind of, discover how on earth I crawl out of this.
Were you able to connect with other women who were in a similar position?
I didn't. Not until my first book came out when I was 23 and people began to contact me. But even then, it was kind of a one-way conversation. They'd email me to say, oh my gosh, your book helped me so much. And I was, of course, they, thank you and send them my condolences. But I just kind of didn't want to. I was just in my own bubble wanting to do it my way. I was quite stubborn and quite determined not to be seen as a widow and not to wear that label. And so I kind of charged out into the world and slept with a lot of people.
What helped you most? Did that help?
I think at the time, I can't regret it.
No.
My poor family.
Well, I guess it was life affirming.
Exactly. I think I needed to feel something and I felt very, very numb. And that was, when you break up with someone in your 20s, that's what people tell you to do. Get out there.
It's true.
Get back on the horse,
It's an awkward thing to put in a dating profile. Luckily there wasn't dating apps back then.
I know, thank goodness. But I told guys, I would blurt it out in that way that anyone who has suffered grief will, relate to, when you just have to tell everyone, the person in the corner shop and the person you meet on the train and the person next to you at the gym, you just have to say, my mum just died, like my husband just died. You just have to tell. So I would tell people on dates and I would tell people as they laid in my bed. I would, blurt it out there because I just, somehow it had to get out. That energy of grief had to get out.
How did they react when you said that?
They didn't call me back.
I have a girlfriend who lost her little girl. She had twins and she lost one of them at 5 months. And she talks about when her daughter started school and she'd just be making that small talk at the gate that you do with the other mums and, have you got any other children? And she would blurt out, yes, my daughter has a twin and she died.
Yeah.
And she said she'd come home and say to her husband, I can't make any friends. I don't know why everyone's staying away from me. And she worked out that it does. It makes people really uncomfortable.
But kind of part of you wants to. You want to make them uncomfortable because that's how you're feeling.
And you want to honour that person who's gone, and they're such a part of your identity and part of your story.
Absolutely. And you feel so much that actually that look of shock on someone's face, you're like, that is, 1% of how I feel right now.
You had anorexia when you were growing up, and an eating disorder is something a little bit like any addiction. It can come to the fore in times of stress. It's a vulnerability. So did you notice that after when you were grieving your first husband?
I was very aware, and all my family was sure that was going to be the trigger to make my eating disorder return, quite understandably. And I'm surprised it didn't. And I think the only reason it didn't is because he would have killed me. If he thought he was the reason that I went back down that road, that would have broken his heart. And so I wouldn't say I ate healthily or ate freely, but I ate enough to sustain myself and to not go down that starvation mentality and not go into the grips of it again. So I probably had periods where I ate less and then I would pull myself back again. And I was just aware of it constantly because, I could very easily have gone back down there.
So tell me about your second wedding day.
Yeah. It doesn't hold much space in my mind. That's the best way to put it. I remember just getting very ready on my own in the bathroom of an apartment that I wasn't very happy in. I wore the dress that I wore to my first husband's funeral.
Amy.
I know. So I was determined not to wear black to my first husband's funeral, so I wore a white lace dress that I found in a charity shop. And for my second wedding, I hadn't even thought about what to wear until the morning.
Which is weird.
We should tell you things.
Yeah.
And then I decided to wear that dress. So,
what a statement.
Yeah, exactly. And I just had my parents there. And honestly, that's about my only memory of it. For whatever reason, whatever my brain is doing with that memory right now, that's about as much as I can tell you. But, it didn't last very long. And, there was lots of layers of emotion that went into why I made that decision to marry that man who is a wonderful person, but not the best person for me.
How old were you when you got married the second time?
20, I can't even remember. Somewhere in my mid-20s.
So quite reasonably soon.
Oh, raw. Absolutely raw. And, absolutely played its place in my healing process. And again, I can't regret it. I regret hurting someone, but I can't regret what it enabled me to do because it enabled me to keep moving forward. And so it brought me to the place that I am now.
What about your third wedding day?
That was wonderful.
What did you wear?
I wore a white dress, not a wedding dress. It would have felt odd to wear a wedding. My first wedding, I wore a wedding dress. And my third wedding to my husband now was outside on the edge of the beach and just very free and just, light and free and beautiful. And many tears in the lead up. It brought up a lot of memories, planning a wedding again, because we actually planned this one, We put work in and we enjoyed planning it and we loved planning it.
Was it his first?
Yes.
I guess you'd be pretty good at it by now.
I'm a pro.
You talk about the difference also, dresses aside, just in the proposals. Perhaps they even hold more symbolism as far as those three weddings. Can you talk about the three proposals and how they were different?
So my first proposal was a week after we found out my husband, or my boyfriend at the time, had cancer. So that was the layer that overrode that one. My second proposal I turned down once, and then...
Because you weren't ready?
Because it was wrong. And then a couple of days later, I felt so fearful, and I felt fear as I said yes. And then the third one, we were hiking through mountains in Peru on a 3-month backpacking trip through South America. And we hiked up this mountain in a blizzard. It was absolutely incredible. And at the top, our guide ran through an Andean ceremony with us where you praise Pachamama, who's Mother Earth. And when you step off the mountain, she said, you leave anything that you want to leave behind in your life behind you. And when you step off this mountain, you step into your new life. And this blizzard was swirling around us, and we hiked down this mountain in the blizzard, and as our feet hit the ground at the bottom, the snow stopped and the sun came out. And my husband just turned around and said, will you marry me? And then said, I'm sorry, I didn't plan to say that. I just had to. I had to in that moment. His plan was to wait until we got back to Australia and he could get a ring, and then he had this big plan to propose to me then. And he just said, how could I not in that moment? And so I guess that was the proposal that I was waiting for, which I never thought that I would be able to get. You know, I thought I'd had my time with my first proposal and my first wedding. I just thought, you know, that's it now. That's fine, but that's it.
And the different headspaces you were in each time you heard that question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see almost 3 Amy's?
Yes.
Yeah.
And probably a million in between. But those are 3 prominent Amy's that I can identify as different people.
After you became widowed, you started writing a column for Grazia magazine in Australia. That's when I first got to know you. And you're I got to know your writing. You're a beautiful writer. And then you came to Australia, and then you became the editor of Grazia.
Yes.
And so that was during your second marriage. And that was when I met you for the first time, and you were Fashion Amy.
Yes.
You know, Grazia was a great magazine, and you were living that life. And then I didn't see you, Grazia closed, and I didn't see you for a while. And the next time I saw you, you came in and you were riding a skateboard.
Yes.
And you met your now, I think, 3rd husband, and you guys were dating, and you were a very different person. You were like some little skater boy.
I know.
Who came in, who was hippie is the only way that I can describe you. And then I sort of have followed you on Instagram, and you're like I look at your Instagram and it's like reading about someone on another planet, but in a really beautiful way. Like you go hiking with your baby, and you I just feel like you're such a hippie, but in a really beautiful, authentic way.
My husband always says to me, only go half hippie. And he says that's why. He says, if you were full hippie, we could not be together. Because he's like a scientist, atheist, feet on the ground, adventurer, but very, very grounded. So he says, yeah, only go half hippie, which is, I think, a good way to describe me.
Yes. And it's interesting, you know, you say some things about you that would surprise people, like you've got a strict sleeping routine for your babies, whereas I would have thought that you would just let them fall asleep under a tree.
Exactly.
In the moonlight.
I can understand that assumption when you kind of look at us and see elements of how we live our lives. But yeah, I am strict down to the minute. Like my baby's poor grandparents, they know. If I say like 9:22, the nap time, 9:22 is the nap time. But that enables me to have the structure to be free.
I've skipped ahead a bit. I wanted to go back a little bit to your first husband, and you talked about a checklist that you made for yourself when he got sick that got you through. What was on that checklist?
Oh, it's in my book. I'll have to remember it now. But I wrote it on the plane on the way between London and Dublin to kind of reunite with him, because when he was diagnosed, he had gone back to Dublin for a wedding, and so I was in a different country to him. So I wrote a checklist of how I wanted to feel and who I wanted to be going forward. And it was, don't question him about things he can't yet answer. Start the day on a positive note and the rest will follow. Don't let depression become the norm. Remember, it's your choice to mourn. Handle your grief with the grace of a woman, not the grief of a child. Remember, you're still the same person. This isn't your disease. Remind him why he loves you every day. Make him smile every day. Don't become a victim. You're far too young to accept this as your lot, and come out stronger.
You're pretty mature for a 23-year-old.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I found that in my journal when I was writing the book. And again, I forgot about it. And I thought, wow, That was pretty good.
Did those things provide a bit of a roadmap for you?
Oh, yes. I've always kept a journal, and I encourage my first husband to keep a journal, and there's some absolute sacred things in that. And I haven't put everything that I could have in the book, especially I put elements of what he wrote, but of course there are things in there that I wouldn't share. But it was absolutely wonderful to use that as a roadmap for writing.
I wanted to ask you about the shadow that a bereaved, when you're a widow, the shadow that has on your current marriage in terms of what's your husband's relationship to your first husband and how he is still in your life, in your heart.
He has always said, I will never ask you questions. You can tell me what you want to when you want to. And he's never Googled me, which is refreshing and amazing, because it would be tempting, because, there's a lot out there.
Yeah, as someone who's been in the public eye for 10 years, more.
I think I'd have Googled him. But I told him, I think we'd been dating a few weeks and we had breakfast on the beach, and I said, I just want you to know I was married before, and my first husband died, and I divorced my second. And I think that's probably about all I told him in that moment. And he said, okay.
And you haven't spoken about it since?
We have. It's dribbled in over the years.
Yeah.
I think not a lot until we were planning to get married. And then I remember laying in bed with him one night crying, saying, I just need you to understand what it's like, what it feels like to marry someone who's dying. And not that he could understand, but I think I tried to put into words in that moment, because I was really scared of marrying again.
Scared that you'd lose him?
Scared that I'd lose him. I was terrified of his stag do. Utterly terrified.
What did he do? Something risky?
No. Well, he went off camping for a weekend, so not risky. But I was gripped.
Not quite Vegas.
No, but I was gripped with real fear.
Yeah.
Like crippling, debilitating fear. Just waiting for that call to say that something had happened. Just completely triggered by my first marriage. And so I needed him to understand why sometimes I was acting loopy. And so I began to tell him little bits and pieces. He sees me as a different person then. He's never read my first book that I wrote when I was 23, and I don't want him to, and I don't need him to, and he doesn't need to. So honestly, I can't tell you exactly what he feels. He's respectful of it. And I think enough time has passed now that he knows he doesn't have to compete and he isn't being compared. Whereas I think it was my second marriage and my first were a very different story. I very much wasn't over even becoming close to getting over the trauma of what happened. And it probably overshadowed every conversation that we had and every action we did and every day that we spent together.
So there were 3 of you in that marriage?
Without a doubt.
But not this one?
Not this one. Now there's 2. Now there's 4.
Now there's 4, but different.
Exactly. There's 2 of us in our relationship. Absolutely only 2, for sure.
In that middle period of your life, your addiction around food turned into an addiction around exercise, right? How did that manifest itself, and when did you recognise that was not healthy?
I think it was bigger even than addiction around exercise. I think it was just an addiction around structure and routine. So it wasn't the exercise so much. It wasn't about, being skinny or being the fastest or being the leanest. I just had this routine that I had to do every day.
And
it included exercise. So, wake up at a certain time, go to gym, run 10K at least every day, cycle to work from, 8, 9, 10 hours, go home, go to a yoga class, eat the same thing for dinner, go to bed. And that was it. And so that was during my second marriage. And so he had to fit into that as well, which is not easy to do. Or it's impossible.
So it was that idea of control because your life had been so out of control.
Yeah. I felt like I was functioning very well, but I was functioning very well because I stuck to that structure. And I just thought, I just don't want to change anything because I'm teetering right here now. And I'm just about controlling it. And if I just change even one, if I just put one speck of dust out of place, it could all come falling down. So, I stuck to that routine for years.
Until what?
Until Grazia closed, my marriage ended, and I had no choice. Everything changed at once. So I thought everything's changing. I may as well just chuck it all out and to start with a fresh blueprint and begin to create a life that I actually enjoyed and, you know, actually brought me happiness rather than just surviving it. And so I think the beauty of everything falling down around me at the same time just forced me to say, okay, I'm starting from the ground, rebuilding from the ground up. Let's look at what I want, who I want to be.
You write in your book about the difference between routine and ritual.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Because I'm still a massive creature of habit. I love, my gosh, I just love it. I thrive on it. It's wonderful. And my life is still pretty repetitive, even though, you know, Instagram might not look that way because, you know, we put up hiking and camping and these little beautiful adventures. But generally, there's pretty, you know, we do the same thing. We live a quiet, homely life. It just happens to be that where we live, we have some beautiful hikes around us, so we don't have to go very far. And so, yeah, rituals to me are just repetitive patterns that support you in a positive way. And so, you know, for me right now, every day I go to the same cafe where they're like family to me, and I sit with my newborn and I write for 2 hours a day. I'm starting my next book and we sit together and write, and he sleeps and I write. And we do that every single day. And then I will often go for a walk or do some exercise because I actually choose to. In my book, I write about how my life coach taught me to ask myself, what do you need to do to feel good right now? So, you know, when I finish writing, I will say, what do I need to do to feel good right now? And it just so happens that often it's, you know, let's go for a walk, let's go for a run. But I'm doing it because I actually choose to and want to. And then, we live a very, very homely life. You know, in the evening, again, we put babies to sleep at the same time every single night on the dot. And then we sit down and talk and we watch Netflix. And then I have for want of a better word, an altar in my bedroom, which is basically a wooden triangle shelf unit my husband made. And within it has kind of, it's hippie.
This is sounding
I can
very
see your
hippie.
eyes widening.
No, I'm trying to imagine it. So it's like
it's
teepee?
It's like a wooden shelf unit. So it's a triangle shaped and it's got 3 shelves in it.
Yeah.
And within it, it's got everything that kind of reminds me of the person I want to be. So it has got rose quartz crystals, but that's because that's all around being loving and stepping away from fear and turning to love. And it's got a card that my husband wrote me for my birthday that says in it, you know, you're the kindest person I've ever met. And for me, that is so important because I'm like, he didn't write you're the smartest or, you know, you're the best writer or you're the best hottest, or the, you know, you're the strongest widow I've ever met.
Yeah, yeah.
Like he just wrote you're the kindest person.
Kindness is such an underrated virtue, isn't it?
And at the end of the day, if I've had, you know, a disappointing work day or something hasn't gone right, I look at it on my altar and I remember, okay, he says I'm kind, that's good. And it has various other things on there that kind of, remind me of who I want to be in that moment. And every night I light a candle there. And every night I just stand there for 1 minute and just stand there. And I say, help me to act from a place of love and not fear.
Tell me about love and not fear. What does acting from fear
look like? It drives every decision you make in life. Everything.
What kind of fear?
Fear of the unknown, I would say. You know, for me, definitely, you know, I came of age. My dad was paralyzed from cancer when I was 17. And, you know, you're coming of age, you know, that is a prime time. And he went to bed one night active and happy and woke up the next day paralyzed from the waist down where a tumour had grown around his spine. And so I had this lesson of like anything can happen. And boy, it's not always good. And so, I kind of, in those coming of age years, I always had this fear of like, oh, what is going to happen next and how am I going to cope and who am I going to be? And so I think it's very easy just to go into that safe structure, routine, anything you can control. And it's not a very happy place to live your life.
How do you get past that? Because for you, awful things did happen.
Yeah.
You know, your dad happily is in remission.
Yeah.
He had cancer treatment for many years for Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah.
Then your husband was diagnosed with cancer. Then he died. Then you got married again. Then that fell apart. Mm-hmm. You know, you had eating disorders. Shitty things have happened. Your magazine, you lost your job. Your magazine closed.
I've closed 2 magazines now.
Yeah. So how do you change that mindset and not catastrophize, because you have every right to, more than most.
Yeah. I think it really is how you look at the world. And, you know, the title of my book, The World is a Nice Place, it did become my motto. And I don't remember how or why, but it became something I repeated when I was at this crossroad of something happening. And I could look at it as in, oh my God, the world is a terrible place. Like, life is so unfair. Or I could choose to say, I hate saying, you know, what has this taught me? Because I think it's such a glib, oversimplified thing to say. Or, you know, I've come out of this stronger.
It's very kumbaya, isn't it?
Oh my God, because it's just not that simple. But I do believe that you're being led on a path. And I can look back now in hindsight and see how each of those things brought me to where I am now. And for me, it began to carve my career path. Like, I began to seek out, I call them empowered survivors, like incredible people who survived amazing things way harder than I have. You know, to tsunami survivors and 9/11 rescue workers and women whose children have taken their own lives, and, you know, way harder than I can comprehend ever. And they still managed to have hope and, you know, be content and believe that tomorrow could be better. And so from interviewing them, I just began to think, I just have to believe that too. Because what's the alternative? You know, I'm 17 or I'm 23 or I'm 25. Like, I've got a lot, well, hopefully I've got a long life ahead of me, and how do I want to feel? Like, I've done the hating the world thing, and I've done the hating everyone around me and isolating myself and cutting myself off, and it feels horrible. It doesn't feel good. And so I had to make a choice to kind of look in another direction.
What's the place of hope in resilience?
I say in my book, if you can't hope for a better day, hope for another day, and the world will do the rest. And to me, I think resilience can often be misunderstood as having to have the answers, kind of having, like when I always laugh because when I cry, my husband's a real fixer. So if I'm crying even for no reason, he will be like, let's write a PowerPoint presentation, do a bullet point plan for how we're going to, yeah, and he does it because that helps him. And sometimes it does help me.
It's a pretty male thing.
Yeah. Sometimes, you know, that is what I need. But generally, I don't need to find the answer right now. I just need to have hope that the answer is out there somehow, somewhere, and that I can find it. So another thing my life coach amazingly says is it's too hard to try and jump from grief to joy. This was a conversation we were having a few months ago when I was trying to digest something pretty shitty a friend had done to me by just being like, oh, but it's okay. It's going to all be okay. You know, I love her. It's fine. And my life coach said, you're trying to jump from grief to joy. Try to jump from grief to hope that one day you can get to joy. And I was like, wow.
Like a middle step.
Exactly. A middle step in between, because the pressure of trying to go from grief to joy actually takes us down in the other direction. If you can just get to a place of hope, like, how would you like your life to look? You know, when I was at the lowest point, you know, my career was who knows where and my marriage was ending. You know, I used to write every day how I wanted my ideal day to look and how I wanted to feel in the ideal day. And I was so far from being there. But I just kept imagining how I wanted to feel and what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And yeah, gradually I got there.
You've got 2 babies now.
Yes.
Are you done?
Who knows?
I always ask that question. It's a terribly nosy question, but I'm always interested in
We're not having a vasectomy,
how women
I'll say
feel.
that.
Yeah.
I love giving birth.
Yeah, me too. No one says that. I do too.
I would do it every day.
Yeah, but I like to do it with drugs.
I like to do it without. Well, actually, who knows? I might love to do it with drugs.
Oh my God. If you think you like to do it without drugs, wait till you try it with drugs. Amy, let me tell you.
I've done it twice without, and that was pretty glorious. So
It can be a bit addictive, the whole giving birth thing.
I said to someone the other day, they asked me the same question, and I said, I really want to give birth again.
Yeah.
And they said, but do you want to have another baby?
That's a different thing.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah. And for someone that needs routine to feel safe and feel supported, how's having kids?
It's a shock.
Yeah, been.
It's a shock. It's a lesson. And I practice every tool I write about in the book every day, every minute of the day. It's actually been wonderful that the book came out at the same time as my second baby was born, because I've been rereading it in a really intimate way. And I've been working it.
What are some of the tools that you use from the book?
A lot, because I don't have any time, so I can't, there's some meditations in the book and stuff I don't have time to do. But I definitely there's sentences, like I said earlier, help me to come at life from a place of love and not fear. There's sentences and simple kind of mantras, for lack of want of another word, that I repeat to myself in the book. And things like getting outside, getting into nature, like, standing with bare feet on the ground. And lots of, there's a chapter in the book about time after tragedy and how your perception of time changes and the fear that you're running out of time. And for me, when people say to me, because I married a man who was dying, that is the real lesson in not having time. When people say to me, oh, they grow up so fast, it triggers me. It terrifies me. And it's what everyone says when they see your baby. Oh, he's getting so big. Oh, they grow up so fast. Oh, you wait, you'll blink and he'll be 21.
Make sure you enjoy every moment, they say in
God.
supermarkets.
Whether or not you've married a man who's dying, we should stop saying that to people. I am really careful never to say that to anyone, because the pressure it puts on the mother to just, adore their baby every second of every moment because you blink and they're going to be gone. Like, we can't be happy in a headspace like that. And so, for me, I'm having to work a lot around that.
I'm so glad you say that, because it shits me up the wall.
Oh, it's awful.
It's almost like, it does put an enormous amount of pressure on you and fear.
I had a midwife say to me, with the best will in the world, make sure that every time you breastfeed, you stare at your baby all the time. God. And I'm like, do you know how often I breastfeed? I'm breastfeeding for about 17 hours a day. Like, I can't just be staring at him.
I got shit to do.
I'm texting. I'm meant to be promoting a book. But for any mother, we can't, the pressure. We can't do that to ourselves.
For most mothers who haven't even, or for anyone who hasn't been through what you've been through and doesn't have such a keen sense of how things can change in the blink of an eye, having a child can make you suddenly feel incredibly vulnerable. And a lot of women, myself included, become, for example, terrified of flying because suddenly mortality is in your face. Has it been very triggering for you?
It's hard to pinpoint what the normal mother fear is versus a widow mother fear is. So, my baby had a 3-hour nap yesterday lunchtime, and as I walked into bedroom, I thought, am I going to be walking into that?
I think that's normal.
Yeah,
tick, normal, totally normal.
Exactly. So I could say, oh, that's because I've been widowed. But actually, I think we've all been there. I probably, thankfully, have tools that enable me to deal with it better than maybe many mothers. I have a fear around my husband dying, which I think is pretty understandable.
Yeah.
So, I say in the book, if he's an hour late home from work, and he's not very good at checking in. If he's stuck in traffic with no reception and I don't hear from him, he should be home. I will go to, he's been in a car crash, he's gone. And within 10 minutes, I will have planned my coping mechanisms. Like, do I go back to England or do I stay here? Do I sell the house or do I stay here? What do I tell the children in the future? Do I think I want to remarry again? Like, I would have gone there.
And you've been to his funeral.
It's all, and we've probably all done that before.
But you more than most, I would say.
And I think me probably in a more debilitating way that it can actually floor me. And so I ask myself, and I can't remember who even taught me this, one of my many therapists, what's more likely to be true? The truth is he could be in a car crash. But what is more likely to be true? He's stuck in traffic, his phone's run out of battery, he can't call me. What's more likely to be true? And that grounds me and calms me enough to wait until the phone call comes from him saying, sorry, stuck in traffic, phone was dead. And I think we can all say that. If someone doesn't reply to our email, and we think, oh, they hate me and I haven't got that job and they hate my work and they're never going to use me again, what's more likely to be true? They're probably just busy. We can all use that sentence. And
I've used that a couple of times since reading your book already. Good. Yeah. It's really powerful because particularly for people who have anxiety or who are catastrophizers or who are just pessimistic, it feels very real.
Oh, very real.
It can feel very real what you're imagining. And that just the logic of what's more likely to be true.
And it's not in denial. It's admitting. Do you know what? That might be true.
But probably it's not.
But probably not. It's probably okay. And one day it might be true in the future, but for now it's probably not.
I love the book. The World is a Nice Place. In the age of Twitter and social media, it's such a refreshing, optimistic take on life. And I'm so glad I know you were going to call it Problem Child.
I was just about to say that.
I'm so glad you didn't. I'm so glad you called it
But
this.
you know what? That's such an exercise of looking at the same life in two different ways. You know, you can look at my life and call me a problem child, or you can look at it and say the world is a nice place.
Yeah.
I think you can all do that.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
The world is a nice place. Yeah. You can buy The World is a Nice Place at apple.co/Mamma Mia. It's such an interesting book. And the way she's written it is really interesting as well. It's not sort of classic memoir and it's not just sort of self-help. It's really all woven together in a way that's just really, really readable. Amy has written for Mamma Mia a number of times, and we've also run an excerpt from her book. So the best way to find those stories is to just search Amy Molloy, Molloy, Mamma Mia. This podcast was produced by Eliza Ratliff. If you like this episode, take a look at our back catalogue, tell a friend, subscribe to the podcast, and I will see you on mammamia.com.au.